Welcome to Built with Purpose. I am Chris Fay, and this is the show where vision meets execution and leadership leaves a legacy. From design studios to innovation hubs and product lines to skylines, we meet the people building more than great companies. They're creating culture, driving impact, and shaping what's next. These are the stories and strategies behind how the world gets built with purpose. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Built with Purpose. I'm your host, Chris Fay. I am fired up about today's conversation. I've got my buddy, Wes on the horn with us, Wes Pamisano with Renegade. And actually, there's so much more that Renegade does I'm excited to talk about today. But I think y'all enjoy today's conversation. Wes, welcome to Built with Purpose, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chris.
I was actually just noticing like your background and the logo in the back. We're like logo brothers at the top, man.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this actually, I know we talk a lot today about Renegade, the construction business, but the logo behind me is a interconnected WJP, which ties back to the family entering the construction industry in 1950 with my grandfather's return from World War II and jumping into the residential building sector.
Oh, super. Okay. Well, that you've already teed us off on the conversation here. So, let's do this. I just kind of before we get started, I always kind of like just get the conversation rolling on some sort of icebreaker. The AI is like this massive conversation that we have today. I'd love to kind of poke around with you on that, but I'm curious what the last thing that you asked ChatGPT. What was the last thing you searched or asked of AI in your life?
Oh, actually, I just sent out, and I think it was a great use case for it. But I just sent out a memo to the entire organization with our new organizational structure that connects to a strategic plan we just released. And I was talking to my team about it, and the reality that you can't just go straight, or my perspective and opinion is you can't just go straight to GPT to write a memo for you. Because certainly I've always led, our culture is really strong and led with a lot of authenticity. And so the recommendation I made to the team in my last use case was just 2 days ago, where I went in and I wrote the entire memo as I normally would, completely in my own voice, and then asked GPT to just give me a little critique and suggest some improvements, which I used some of the improvements. I didn't use some of them because I wanted to make sure that, and I prompted it to maintain my own voice and personality. And so anyway, one of my pet peeves maybe is people that are too quick to go to GPT, and then, you lose the originality, and you can clearly tell when you see it that it came out of GPT. And so, I've been trying to experiment with use cases where it's helpful, but not ultimately using it to completely do the work for you, where there's still that human element and culture and personality that needs to come through in the messaging.
Yeah, because I mean, it almost starts bringing like a monolithic voice where everybody starts sounding the same. And the one thing that always drives me crazy is you can always tell it starts adding those little icons like the apple and the button and all this sort of stuff, and people will just copy that and paste it into an email. I'm like, dude, just at least get rid of the icons, because the icons like give it away. Like it's not only the voice but the icons.
One of the other ones I love that I look for is a long form hyphen. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh, yeah.
A message that comes out of GPT always has the long hyphen. And if you use an actual keyboard, it gives you a short hyphen.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's crazy. I was in Atlanta yesterday, and I was driving back late last night, and I was sitting there and I was thinking actually about the podcast. I was thinking about, our conversation today and just some other thoughts. And I was like, I wonder if I could have a podcast with ChatGPT. And so I spun up the voice mode in the car, and I started asking, I've got like this casual female voice as my GPT voice or whatever. And so I'm sitting there I'm like, hey, do you think we could record a podcast? And then, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's try this for like 5 or 6 minutes. I did like a 25-minute podcast last night with ChatGPT in the car, and I should have recorded it, but it was like a crazy conversation. And actually you put it in a situation to be more conversational. It was really interesting. So anyway, Cool applications. I want to kind of dive in on that with you a little bit in a bit, because I know kind of you all in your business being really kind of tech forward. I'm interested in your insights, but kind of for the audience, like set the stage for us here. I mean, you talked around your grandfather coming back and kind of getting into the business. You've got these handful of brands and different industries that you've been focused on, and you talked about culture. Like, just give us the 30,000 foot view. I mean, who are you? What are you doing? Like, tell us about your companies.
Yeah, I'll give you the briefest possible overview of the story. I grew up in the construction industry, working with my grandfather, my dad, my uncle. Pretty old school construction business, but I was fortunate to grow up with a real appreciation for the trades and what it takes to get the work done. And growing up, really working on the tools as a carpenter, and so really great foundation of the construction industry, and a tremendous amount of appreciation and respect for the legacy of the construction industry and how great it is of a business. And then coming out of school, I went to work for a commercial contractor and spent 12 years there working through the ranks, and just learned a tremendous amount there as well. Using both of those experiences as a foundation for my own journey, in 2013, left and started an entrepreneurial venture that at the time was named Pamisano. Like most founders, started with my own last name as the name of the company. And that was a commercial construction company. So over time, so we've been in business about 12 and a half years now. But over those 12 and a half years, we did go on a little bit of an unconventional journey, with starting as a commercial building contractor and pretty rapid growth in the building segment. Then shortly thereafter, starting into heavy civil and infrastructure work. That business unit has grown tremendously and is a big part of our story and success today. And then behind that, started to get into the trades. So my own foundation in the industry really came back with this desire to be what we internally and in our culture call being a true builder, where we always wanted to have an ability to do work ourselves and not just be the general contractor. So we started into a variety of the trades, and we got into custom millwork and decorative metals, all types of carpentry, concrete. And then through the heavy civil segment, we've gotten into utilities, demolition, paving, earthwork, pile driving, and deep foundations. And so really a bunch of trades associated with the heavy civil and infrastructure segment. And then in addition to that, in 2021, we entered into the structural steel business with a fabrication and erection business. And then we always had this idea and concept that there was a better way to build things. So we went pretty heavily into the prefabrication space, and currently operate a prefab facility that's really leaning into a better way to assemble buildings as a kit of parts. And then most recently made an investment in a mechanical electrical plumbing firm that does design build, regional player that does design build mechanical electrical plumbing. So, it's a growing and vertically integrated business. And I guess maybe I also left out that 2 years ago, we started to also venture into real estate deals. So, you really take that, it's a vertical stack of businesses and services that are all focused around the built environment, that influence the entire project lifecycle of development, design, manufacturing, and construction of a variety of different projects.
So did you know? I'm kind of going back to the original one. So your family was in the construction industry. You go to work for a general contractor outside of the family. Did you, like, in your core, did you always know you wanted to do your own thing and start your own company, or was that something that kind of came later in your career?
No, I mean, that really is a great question, an interesting part of my journey that, I honestly thought for a long time that I would ultimately stay with the company I was working for. And then ultimately, as a lack of succession planning, I felt like I was called to go and figure something out on my own. And it was also interesting that my dad and my uncle were partners in the family business, and they were still doing residential construction. I wanted to start this high growth commercial focused firm. And so my dad was nearing retirement age, and it didn't really make sense for them to jump into the risk. And honestly, he probably thought I was a little crazy with the the original business plan that, when I told him,
I got a good thing going, Wes. I'm not sure we want to jump into this thing.
And, he was nearing retirement. At the time, my dad was almost 70. So he was nearing retirement. And I was this young guy that had all these big aspirations. And my business plan was pretty simple and almost laughable looking back. The business plan was 0 to 100 million in revenue as fast as possible in the commercial construction space. So, start like any other startup, by yourself, self-funded, jump in, start hiring people and go to 100 million as fast as possible, which, certainly we had tremendous success in those early days. We assembled a great team and hit the ground running. And within 36 months of starting the business, we hit 100 million in revenue and hired almost 100 people. So, from one person to 100 and from 0 to 100 million in revenue in our first 36 months in business. And so, tremendous success story out of the gate. And then from there, we started to just, really you look back on our journey and every 12 to 18 months, we've spun up some new aspect of the business, some new service offering, new business, some new elements been added about every 12 to 18 months is kind of the pace of what we've done over the entire history of the business. And so, we're at a point now that we're certainly not slowing down. We still have big aspirations and growth goals and, a very strong purpose and culture in the organization of where we're headed.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of poke in on that just for a bit. I just had a random curiosity question. So, what was the first project?
First project, yeah.
What was it?
That one is always fun to look back on, and really is the foundation of. We started like most construction companies, named after founder. The name of the company was Pamisano, but the first project in the tie of our brand as it is today. So today the brand is Renegade, and we rebranded. So it's under RNGD, but internally we call it Renegade. So it's just an acronym for the word, of course. But the original journey, and we started on the first project, was actually a project called Fulton Alley. So it's associated with what was Harrah's Casino. Today it's Caesars in downtown New Orleans. We're founded in New Orleans, and we got an opportunity to bid on a project that, honestly, as a brand new player, it's not the type of job that's easy to win. There were other contractors looking at it. I think that I want to say there were 4 people that submitted proposals, or 4 companies that submitted proposals for that project. And so it was a best value type of selection. And we came in with a really unique approach because we knew that as a new business, without a team, without a history, we had to do something different, to be able to get the project. And so we went in with an approach that we were 30% faster and 15% cheaper with the same quality as the next closest bidder. And so we knew we had to do something that was out of the ordinary. And we came up with some really creative ideas. So we looked at the project and found ways to add value by working smarter, is the way we always defined it in those days. Well, pretty quickly that caught on in the market. We had a lot of success. So that project, we ended up having tremendous success. We did well. The project was successful. We followed through on everything that we planned to do. We finished the project on time. We finished on budget. We delivered and executed in a tremendous way as a new business. And every project we looked at subsequently over the first year, we did the same thing. So we kind of take a project, turn it inside out, find smarter, better ways to do things. And out of that, one of our trade partners called and said, "Hey, what are you Renegades doing on this project?" And so we were just 2 months in business, and we started being called Renegades by the market because we would always do something different than what was maybe depicted in the plans and specs. And we'd always try to come up with something that would add value for the client, because that was the only way that we could really differentiate, is to ultimately come in with a better mousetrap and something that was same or better quality, faster and less expensive than the competition, because otherwise we wouldn't get the job, because we were the new people, and why not go with the more established player?
Yeah, it's like the high risk is to go with the new guy that's just starting the business and trying to get everything spun up. Yeah.
Yeah, so it definitely took some convincing on the first project, and that one is always fun to look back on, because at the time, I was, at least the public-facing side of the business was, one person, and the job. This is in 2013 dollars. It was a almost $5 million contract as our first project. And so you take a $5 million contract, and of course you can imagine it's almost comical to think about a sales process of what that would look like to go sell a job with no team, no superintendent, no project manager, brand new business, no history or resume. So certainly it was challenging. And, we were able to convince the ownership group that we were worth a risk, and they took a shot on us, and we're extremely grateful that they chose to use us in that moment. And then pretty quickly we started onboarding team members. So we had 11 people in the organization that first year. And really from there just started to accelerate and build our team and really strong culture that's driven the growth since then. So that original reference to Renegade on the first project, ultimately 10 years later became our brand.
So
when we decided we were going to show up with them.
About 10 years later, that's when you rebranded to Renegade. How cool is that? So I mean, I want to talk in depth about your culture and kind of the differentiator, but like I just think about like that story, and I've got part of my thing is I run our family business, and we've got this legacy back from 73, and one of the things is how do you make sure that legacy, that story, like how did we get the name Renegade? How do we make sure that we're thinking differently, and how are we attacking these projects and ripping them apart to be different? And like how do you, at a company the size that you are today, and also not just one company, but you've got a multitude of businesses and brands. Like, how do you keep that same kind of small business mentality alive and well in this large, complex organization that you have today?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a fun part of the journey. And so when we intentionally started to grow, that was one of the non-negotiables that we said, at any point in our trajectory, if we're not able to maintain the same culture that we started with, then obviously we've got to slow down the growth and make sure that we're able to sustain the culture. And so that's been a point of emphasis and focus. And one of the strategic pillars for the organization is maintaining our culture as we grow. In terms of how we do that, there, is of course never just one easy answer. And so some of the things that maybe stand out that I think have helped us maintain our culture, we have company books that were written and published over the years that every new person in the organization, I'm always a fan that obviously we live in a digital world and certainly we lean into tech as an organization, but I like to be able to hand new members of the team a book that really captures the story and a lot of key elements of our culture. So every team member that joins, and starting in the interview process, we talk a lot about our culture and make sure we have alignment of values and who we are as an organization, and then bring that into the onboarding world. There's a real emphasis on culture and getting onboarding right, which that book is a big part of that. And then even today, I still meet with all new team members, which originally used to be one-on-one. Today, we do it in groups. So we have a monthly culture immersion. Each individual is expected to review that book in advance, and then they come into that cultural immersion. And I share a lot of the stories, like the one we just talked about of how Renegade came to be in our culture. I share a lot of the stories directly from me with the team members to have them understand through storytelling and reading the book and understanding who we are as an organization, to try to embed those values from the beginning. And then also there's consistent reinforcement. We have really strong core values, which one of those is renegade mentality and this desire that we're going to challenge the status quo to build a better future for the industry. Even that as one of our core values, which we have a set of unique core values that are memorable, that everyone in our organization rallies around. And we use those as reinforcing mechanisms in every step of the journey, through you did a great job because you're consistent with the value, or maybe you didn't do such a great job because you were inconsistent with the values. And then, a series of annual awards around our values. And it's certainly a pretty comprehensive approach around maintaining consistency,
living it and being a part of your talk track every single day. So the book, I'm curious, is that something, is it like every couple of years you'll do an update to update the story, or like how do you maintain? I love the idea. How do you maintain the book?
It's interesting. So original book, when I recognized, which we were in high growth mode at this point, original book was written in 17 or in 16, published early 17. And that's the foundation of the business. So kind of core principles that we were founded on. And then in 19, we published another one. So you talk about the evolution. And as we've grown in 19, we realized that one was very philosophical. So in 19, we published one that we call a Renegade Experience, which is rubber meets the road. So how do we show up as individuals? How do we work with the partners on our projects? How do we work with each other as team members? How do we show up in the broader community? So kind of how's that philosophy utilized in your everyday life? Then we went into growth mode again, and we doubled in size in 22, 23. So in 21, we published another supplement, which was our culture and elements of our culture that we hold sacred that we want to make sure we maintain as we go through this next growth trajectory. And then in 23, published another supplement. And so actually I'm in the process right now of taking those 4 different documents that today sit as individual books, combining them into one cohesive volume. So this is kind of first time in our history that we're actually consolidating, because intentionally there's a lot of repetition between those different volumes, because each time, whether it's a new book or publication or a company meeting or congratulating people, we intentionally repeat messaging pretty consistently just to reinforce it. And so in those 4 books, there's a lot of repetition. So we recognize that. And so right now we're in the midst of, and we'll publish on September 1st, a new volume, which will be combining those 4 documents into one and having a consolidated, at this point, almost, I guess at that point, about 12 and a half years in, we'll have a consolidated single document that we can start to hand to the newest team members. And we're on the cusp of another growth journey. And so it's a great time to do that.
Man, that is so cool. And it's like, do you have are there some folks helping you with that, or are you doing that yourself, or what's the book process? Because obviously a lot of it has to come from you, but you've got to execute something that probably takes some time. How do you do that? Like, what's the process?
Of course that's evolved as we've grown. In the earlier volumes, I did a lot of the copywriting myself because, you're saying it's founding principles. It was a lot of stuff that was in my head that I really wanted to capture on paper to make sure that we maintain consistency. And, a lot of documenting that was for me to explain the story to the team, but then also for them to hold me and the organization accountable. So we're giving you something saying, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to maintain this culture. Well, it makes it really easy for someone to pull the book out and point to it and call us out if we're not doing what we said we were going to do. And so I love the check and balance and accountability.
We're going to live and breathe, right? And this might be in conflict with that.
Yeah. So I love the accountability and how, everyone in the organization understands way back to the founding principles, who we are, and making sure that we're maintaining the consistency of the culture as we grow. So I mentioned we were at 100 people today. We're at about 425. And, of course, it's continuing to be challenging. But from our projections, it looks like over the next 18 to 24 months, we'll be around 600 people. So that number is growing still pretty rapidly. And, every time we grow, I think one of the other mechanisms is we adopted pretty early on a team of teams mindset and culture. And that team of teams culture, I think, has been a big part as well of our success of, being nimble, agile, understanding that the teams are really where the magic happens. And those teams being highly functional and communicating together are really what has driven our success. And so, being able to maintain that team of teams model yet scale has been a little bit of a balancing act, but something that has served us really well.
So how do you, just thinking out loud, obviously kind of this team of teams methodology, you've got to have really good people that align already align with a bit of your culture and your wiring coming into the business. And obviously there's this reinforcement through the book and the Renegade way and everything that you do. And then, but there's also probably a tremendous need for leaders in the business to help you scale, right? So making sure you've got the right leadership team that can help deliver the message and reinforce to the various teams. So how do you talk to me a little bit about kind of the leadership balances? Like how do you surround yourself with the right leaders that can ultimately take these multitude of businesses? Because you got a bunch of stuff going on. I'm sure the guy or girl that's running the civil group is a very different individual than that running steel and commercial and Nashville and what have you. So what's kind of the leadership program look like? Like how do you surround yourself with the right types of folks and get them aligned to what it's going to take to network effect your vision?
Yeah, that one, another great question and topic. And, just like the culture question, I would say that, there's never one easy answer. But I mean, in terms of leadership, we kind of started with a philosophy and always have maintained the way that we see the organization and view it is we try to limit the amount of hierarchy that shows up and, really just work together towards common goals. So we have three levels in the organization that we've always worked hard to maintain. And one is the teams, which is where the magic happens. And the emphasis is on how do we create high performing teams? And those teams, can be everything from the accounting team that's processing payroll and invoices, or a team that's working on a civil project, or a team, as you mentioned, that's working on structural steel fabrication, so all different types of teams in the organization. But the foundational element of the business is those teams. But every team, as you mentioned, needs good leadership. And so we have team leaders that are kind of the next layer in the organization. And the job of those team leaders is to support and enable the teams. How do we develop the people on the teams and mentor and coach them? How do we show up in terms of making sure that the teams have what they need from a resource perspective, and really just focusing on making sure the teams are able to and set up to be successful and to maximize their own skill sets and talents. And so the team leader is the next kind of key element of our culture and the structure of the business. And then, of course, we do also have an executive leadership team as kind of the third piece of the puzzle. And the executive leadership team's job is to set strategy and direction for the overall organization and to develop more team leaders. And so we're developing and supporting team leaders as an executive team, and also determining the strategic trajectory of the business. And so those three levels in the organization and the way that we've always operated have served us very well. And it's a model that can continue to scale and grow because, as the number of teams grows, of course, we need to develop more team leaders. As the number of team leaders grow, we need to make sure they're appropriately supported by the executive team. And so our overall structure has worked really well. And then in terms of how we identify and find leaders and put them in place, we created back in 2018 the Renegade Academy. And so, even before the company name change, we've always had this Renegade concept that's been embedded in the business. And so we created Renegade Academy, which is an internally, internal content, internal teaching, but leadership principles that have developed a lot of our leadership in-house. Now, we also try to maintain a healthy balance of integrating people from outside because they bring new perspectives and ideas. But because of the strength of our culture, we try to keep a balance of, let's just call it 80 or 85% of new roles ultimately get filled internally by appropriate training, development, mentoring of individuals in the organization that are being promoted into new roles. And that internal pipeline of leaders has driven a lot of our growth and continues to today. We just recently, actually, I mentioned a minute ago that we sent out a memo associated with our organizational structure, and in there, we just recently had 40 people in the organization that were promoted into new positions and roles. And so, the influence of those individuals growing personally is creating and enabling the growth of the organization.
Yeah. Well, it also sets up kind of a pace and a tone for anybody that comes into the company. And they're like, hey, look at this internal promotion. Look at how much investment they're putting into growing each and every one of us. And this is the type of organization that I want to be a part of. And I think, it's interesting. We've had some conversations in our organization, but also in others that, oftentimes people are asking for professional development. And, hey, we need to go hire somebody to do X, Y, Z. Well, oftentimes when we look across the organization, you've got people that have expertise in various areas. Like, this individual is a great communicator. This person is awesome with, with strategy. Like, this person's really good at finance. And so, it sounds like you've done a really good job of trying to figure out a way to unlock all of the internal expertise and level your team up. And that was kind of always our thing. Like, how do we level our team up to maximize the expertise that we have internal? And then to get to the next level, that's when we potentially bring people in from the outside, to get our folks up. So it sounds like you've kind of figured that recipe out of how to just internally develop each other through the academy and the Renegade Academy. And by the way, like the whole Renegade story, dude, I love that. I've known you now maybe for a year, and like I've always been curious about the story. But I don't know, it seems like you've done an excellent job of that. And then ultimately, once you have those processes in place, like it's just infectious for people in the business, right? They see it, they want to do more of it. It attracts the best people, and so really cool, man. That's an awesome story. So just kind of thinking out loud on this, like how does technology come into this world? I mean, I kind of asked you about this AI question early on in a bit, but when you're 11 people early on versus, now at 400 people versus, now at 600 something people, like what are you all doing as it relates to just general technology, whether it be mindset, the kind of artificial intelligence, like what are y'all doing in the business to embrace that to help you scale?
Yeah. I think the foundation of that starts with, we've talked a lot about this, but I'll use the same topic because really it's how it started and shows up in our culture, is that Renegade mentality is a core value and Renegade approach. And we've got a lot of Renegade concepts that are embedded in the core values and the approach of the business. And so what that means is that we are constantly trying to pursue better ways to do things. And so obviously it couples really tightly with the culture of who we are as innovators in the industry. And our core purpose of the business is that we exist to revolutionize how we build. So if we're going to revolutionize how we build in the built environment, which in our case, we use a pretty broad definition of revolutionize how we build. So we think of it in terms of people, of how are we building people? How are we building for the industry? Can we move the industry forward and be part of a larger movement? Certainly we can't do it on our own, but can we be one of the groups in the industry that's constantly pushing and challenging the status quo? Can we build within the community? So we have our foundation that serves that purpose. So this idea of revolutionizing how we build is pretty broad in the way that we view the world, but technology obviously closely ties to that. If we're going to challenge the status quo and push the industry forward, we've got to be a little bit more on the leading edge of technology. And so it's something that we embraced. And, it's been a challenge, I'll say, though, because, we constantly look at what a lot of the bigger players than us are doing. In the multi-billion-dollar construction companies, there are some of them that lean heavily into innovation and make a tremendous amount of investment in the space. As a mid-sized player, it's hard to free up dollars in the budget. When you have a lot of other priorities and in a business like construction where margins are generally tight and there's a lot of pressure to perform, it's hard to free up space to invest in R&D. And so, it's definitely a juggling act and I think challenging for companies like us that are, smaller, to let's just say mid-sized players in the industry that, maybe don't have as much discretionary funding to do that. But, we certainly have prioritized in a big way, leaning into technology. And then the way it shows up in our company, which is maybe where some of being prudent about our G&A expenses, we don't have a whole department of people that are doing nothing but innovation. And so maybe that's where, as a smaller company, you look at it, it's kind of daunting of how are we actually going to go do something different. So we started out just by establishing a task force around it. People that are passionate about finding better ways to do things in technology and kind of an innovation team. And so we approached it as a team where those individuals in virtually every case have other responsibilities and duties, but they're also driving innovations into the business. And so that's how we started. Now, today we do have some people that are doing data analysts, programming. We've got a technology team. And then we've got a group that's also focused on innovations as it relates to how we deliver projects. And so today we do have people that are more leaning heavily into innovation. And those technologies have been transformational for us. From a tech stack perspective, we're in a very similar place to what many companies are. Our project management platforms, Procore, so I mean, I'm using that one thing as an example because, obviously there are a lot of contractors that are on similar tech platforms. But I think the things that we're doing in addition to and in conjunction with those typical tech platforms are really where we move the needle, which is the data analytics, real-time information. So a good real-world application of that is that for our heavy civil and infrastructure group, everything in that world is about production. And so we've kind of gamified it for the team where they're getting real time. It actually updates every couple hours. So they can go look at the scoreboard. How much money are we making? Where's our productivity related to plan and budget? And how are we doing on the job? And it's real time. So, that's happening through app data input out in the field. And so certainly, the data has to be really good for this to take place. But, we've been able to, through that data analytics team, put in place tools that puts the information in the field team's hands and really empowers them to go out and make things happen. And, that has been a huge difference maker in that heavy civil and infrastructure segment where it's all production oriented. And they're looking at it constantly. And, they know exactly where they are. And what we're finding is that in most instances, they're going out and finding ways to beat and exceed the targets and budgets and numbers. And it's honestly made us much better as a business.
Yeah, I mean, when you see the live scoreboard and you're empowered with the data to make the right decisions, I mean, it drives performance in a heartbeat. Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned some of the larger firms, and I think what we've seen in the industry is oftentimes it's less about the size of the organization, and it's just really more about the mindset. So I did a conversation with a lady this morning that is part of a really small organization, but is really forward leaning into technology, right? And how to apply technology to their business. And we started talking around, ideal customer profiles and the types of businesses, like they're going to have this tech stack, they're going to do these things. But one of the things that really can set organizations apart is just generally like that mindset. And I'd say that there's companies in Europe, you're a really good sized organization, obviously as a whole, but like there's companies much larger than you that are much farther behind as it relates to, the leveraging of technology and that mentality and that forward looking. So I think that oftentimes, size can impact a bit of budget availability and the teams and the focus, but it also is just that culture of innovation. I mean, there's significantly larger firms that are way behind, in their leveraging of data, and there's smaller firms that are just like crazy innovators in how they're using technology in their business. And, honestly, I think it's a really good way for small to mid-sized firms to compete, and you talk about probably trying to compete against multi-billion-dollar year firms. I mean, this approach, this tech stack, these data insights, this culture that you have, I mean, this is a way to compete, I would imagine, in your space, and probably why you're winning a ton of business.
Yeah. One of the advantages that you're mentioning, and certainly we recognize, is that, we find that we're able to be significantly more nimble, move faster than maybe what large organizations are able to do. And so certainly, speed can become an advantage, especially as it relates to innovation and technology. It's interesting too, that in our culture, we started out very focused on execution excellence because we knew that as a construction company, and especially a new entrant in the market, the baseline is, can you execute? Can you go out and do what you said you were going to do? Finish on time or early, finish under budget, maintain a great safety record. So out of the gate, we wanted to make sure that we had the fundamentals down. And at that point, it was hard to say, well, we're going to go be innovative, because the honest truth was, we got to get a job and then go out and execute. And if we don't execute, our reputation is going to be bad pretty quickly in the market. And so we were very execution focused. And then that really shifted a little bit to leaning into innovation and this concept of being renegades and challenging the status quo. And so, the next chapter of our journey is we've got the fundamentals of execution down, and, we know how to build projects. We know how to go out in the field and succeed. So we started leaning into innovation. So kind of the next chapter, and, first 5 years, let's say, was about execution and fundamentals. Next 5, innovation. That's really embedded in our culture now and is driving a lot of our success. And so now we've shifted, and then the new focus is a little bit more leaning into a culture of learning. And so how do we create learning feedback loops, and how do we create this culture of learning, which we, again, have some foundational elements with our academy, and certainly we've got some progress on that front. But I think there's another layer of really enhancing who we are as an organization, by leaning heavily into learning and really pushing hard on developing the broader base of the organization, which that was prompted by. So strategically, we just built and moved into a new headquarters facility in New Orleans. And part of that headquarters, we built a 25,000 square foot training facility, which for a company our size, I don't know many that have made similar decisions, but that was with this mindset of knowing that, hey, for the next chapter of the trajectory of the business and the next 5-year chapter of our history, we just want to lean heavily into learning. And so we built this 25,000 square foot training center in conjunction with our new facility to lean heavily into that. And as we grow and onboard and rapidly scale the organization, we want to make sure that we're embedding learning as a key element of our strategy and where we're headed.
Yeah, man. And honestly, like for you, like what a great way to put a stake in the ground of how important we believe learning is than to build a facility. You can actually look to your team and here's a tangible way by which we are going to be investing in learning, and you can see it. It's right here. So a couple just a question I just kind of had for you, and it ties in. You mentioned the trades a bit earlier, and I want to come back a bit to that. But you talked about kind of revolutionizing the industry. Kind of your company's not only revolutionizing, changing internally, but also kind of this innovation of the broader industry. Like in your space, I mean, what's the hurdle to overcome? In the coming years, like what do you see in this kind of building industry that is something that the industry needs to be thinking about and like broadly trying to figure out a way to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, for the broader industry, I know the hot button topic, and certainly you hear a lot about the lack of availability of skilled labor and the retiring, the current individuals who are talented in all the trades that are retiring out of the industry, just given the ongoing generational shift. So I think a lot of people are worried about what it looks like 5 or 10 years from now, and how's the work going to actually get done when we've got a gap in terms of the need for tradespeople. So I think maybe that ties a little bit to our strategy, that we realized some of that early on and we've leaned into it. And, our approach has been, while many of the general contractors over the last 25, maybe longer than 25 years, but let's just say over the last 25 years, a lot of contractors have moved away from self-performing work and just being more risk managers and construction managers, and then leveraging tradespeople and trade partners to get the jobs done. We certainly saw an opportunity to be, even though it's the old way of doing things, if you look back over history, I think in today's environment, it might be a little bit innovative to go actually be a true builder and be able to self-perform and show up with a significant labor force on all of your projects. And so we've looked at that and said, yes, I think, and generally agree with the challenge that's coming in the industry, but what can we do about it? And what we can do about it is starting in middle school, educating kids about the opportunities that come out of the construction industry. And so our foundation's purpose is from middle school through stable employment, architecture, engineering, construction, the AC industry, and helping kids who may not have opportunities otherwise to go from middle school to stable employment and hopefully enter into a job with us or anyone in the industry, honestly, but hopefully enter into the job. And so we've brought that mindset all the way back to middle school, and then tying in with high schools, trade programs, and, how do we build a really skilled workforce within our organization and, more broadly for the industry. And so the foundation is really a big part of our approach to how we solve for that. And then by having a great culture, getting the youth that are in the community excited about what we're doing, we're finding that, there's honestly, I think maybe a little bit of a pessimistic view about the future of the industry, because we're finding that, we've been able to solve for that. And I think, by having the skilled workforce, that we hopefully also couple that with the Renegade mindset, can show up with innovative ways of building, moving more into a factory and a manufacturing environment, less happening at the job site, higher quality, safer, a new approach and maybe more attractive jobs when you can work in a manufacturing environment versus the more transient nature of the industry and what it's been traditionally. And so, by some of the both maybe coupling innovation and learning and this approach to having a great culture and attracting the youth into the trades, we think we have a formula and a recipe that over the long haul, in that 10, 15, 20-year horizon is going to really pay off for us and put us in a unique, differentiated position.
Yeah, I love it, man. As I'm sitting here thinking about just, having a broad organization with a multitude of needs, right? You've got tech needs and leadership needs and people selling and people marketing and people building and manufacturing. And there's all these opportunities. It enables you to find good people, like even young people that want to come into a business. They may not even know where they fit yet, right? But they've got an opportunity to maybe come in and to learn a specific skill set in a trade, but then potentially move and migrate through the organization. And I think, oftentimes, man, people just want to be a part of an organization that has purpose, that has meaning, that wants to invest. And a company that's kind of doing it at your level with the culture is far different than the concrete subcontractor over here and the steel subcontractor and the electrical subcontractor and these smaller organizations. You can build a larger organization with a lot of diversity of skill sets, right? That enables you to have the breadth of scale to invest in training and development and innovation and all the things, and then provide people an opportunity to come into something that might otherwise not get a chance to experience that. They might have to go work for the local paving subcontractor that's got 23 employees and love them to death, but they're not able to provide the level of cultural reinforcement that you do. So yeah, I think it's a really good idea that you've come up with, and I think that's a common thing that I hear on the podcast is just the challenges with labor and how do we end up changing the perception of what it means, right? To be in that space. And, not every person needs to go to college and go get a 4-year degree. I mean, sometimes there's some opportunities to be very successful coming in and learning and perfecting a skill. So yeah, it's a common pain point, but man, I think you're doing a great job in solving the challenge. And I'm curious on the foundation side. I mean, how do you run that foundation? Is it supported via, your organizations? Do you get other people from outside involved in that? Do you have somebody that's like kind of running point on that? Or is it more of a support mechanism? Like, tell me a bit more about the foundation.
Yeah, foundation started small in 2016. I guess like any other element that's part of our organization, we started like any other new startup venture, very small and bootstrapping and making things happen. And, we always knew we wanted to invest in the community. I think it took us a little time to get traction and get dialed in on purpose, which then in 2019, we formalized it as a 501c3. And then we shortly thereafter added an executive director. So we do have someone today, at least, that is focused on the foundation and the programming around the foundation. As a 501c3, of course, we have a board. So it's a board managed organization with an executive director in place. And the foundation has a variety of programs with a very dialed in purpose of facilitating, helping kids from middle school to stable employment in the AEC industry. So we have a variety of different programs, some in conjunction with other nonprofit partners where we're focused in middle schools, high schools, and then coming out of that, one of our trademark programs is our scholarship program where we're helping kids go to either trade school or 2- and 4-year degrees, just a variety of different programs. But as of today, we have 35 kids on scholarship in a variety of different programs that have some demonstrated financial need coupled with wanting to pursue a degree that's in the architecture, engineering, construction community. And so we're finding a tremendous amount of success of helping kids move into the trades and or into professional and management based positions. But, to the point you made earlier, there are some amazing careers and opportunities for kids that are coming right out of high school that are extremely talented and smart, that don't have to go rack up the college debt and move right into an amazing opportunity to train and learn an advanced trade and a lot of excitement. And the kids that we're bringing into our facilities now, they're seeing what we're doing. So, you take something like steel fabrication and certainly there was kind of the old school steel fabrication. Well, today everything's computerized. And so for the kids of today, even my own son, it's kind of interesting because I bring him around the business and he's 17, almost 18, but I bring him around the business. And the thing that he gets most excited about is something like the steel shop, because he goes in there. It's just super cool. You go in there and it's computer-based fabrication. The machines and robots are doing the work. And so that type of advanced manufacturing resonates with today's generation. And so, if you can couple leaning into the innovation and having a real purpose and this idea of moving the industry forward, today's youth, I find, are very driven by purpose. And, or honestly, maybe getting a little bit, or certainly I hear at times instances where they get a little bit of a bad review or bad rap. Well, maybe they don't want to work like old generations used to, but certainly we don't buy into that. And, what I'm seeing, a lot of amazing kids that are coming out of school and entering into trades that are super passionate, want to learn, but they also don't necessarily want to do things the old way of doing things. They want to know there's purpose. They want to do something creative, unique, and advanced manufacturing is one of the places that I think there are amazing jobs that are continuing to be added in the construction industry that really resonate with younger people.
That's awesome, man. That's made such a cool story, and I could not agree with you more. And I think that just everybody, when they find a spot that they feel like they can excel and they can add value, and it's part of a group or a company or an organization that has a higher purpose, right? That helps them find that spot. I think the challenge sometimes is that kids or even adults, when they're not in the right seat in the bus, when they're not in a position to be successful or leverage the skill sets that that God's given them, they struggle, right? But when you find a niche or you find a home where they can be part of something bigger than themselves, and then also do something that that they're wired and built internally to do, they can be such a better contributor to businesses, man. So, well, you're doing awesome stuff. We're coming down to the end, and Wes, just a couple things. I want to hit you with a couple rapid fire built with purpose questions before we close. And so the first one is, where do you get, you as the CEO, the visionary, the founder, where do you get your inspiration? What is it? Is there somebody? Is there something? What is it that that you learn from, that you get passion and drive and motivation from, help from? What's been that thing that's given you kind of your drive, your leadership, your next level in thinking? What challenges you?
I'm certainly a learner, and constantly reading and looking for new information. But outside of the kind of self-education process, I'm also always have been a student of construction. And there are, over the course of my journey, so many things that stand out. Great example of that, I went and spent some time with Doug Woods of DPR. DPR being an inspiration to me as a young construction entrepreneur, and just love Doug's story, and just I would encourage others to reach out, and you'd be surprised what people will do to help you. And so I reached out to Doug, and he was so gracious to invite me out to California and give me kind of a whole run through. So, I mean, that's just one example of many that I've done over my trajectory, my career, of going to who I thought was the best and trying to learn and get what I could out of that conversation. And so a lot of great learning moments that stand out like that. But then in conjunction with that, I'm constantly pursuing opportunities to learn myself. And so I'm part of a bunch of different groups, and recently, actually in January of this year, went back to school. So I was attended a crash course MBA type program. And so, it's really a combination of things. But, I talked about the organization having a culture of learning. So certainly I live with that.
Yeah. Awesome. And then what, so kind of last question here would be, I mean, you've accomplished an amazing amount. You've built, these awesome organizations, thinking about employing 400 and something families, people out there that you're generally supporting. What are you most proud of? I mean, at this stage of your career, and you've got a lot more to go. But what are you most proud of in your life and your business with everything that you've accomplished?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of accomplishments, there are so many things to look back on, but I think probably the proudest moment, especially on the business front, relative to accomplishments, because of course there's the whole other side of life of everything else that encompasses your entire life that I think about when I think of accomplishments, on the family and personal front as well. But if I focus on the business, the team that is in our business today is a group of people that, we've assembled over time. And it's just been really interesting to watch the journey of the team, how they've grown, how they've moved into roles. And I talked a lot earlier about the academy, the internal promotions, and how people have really risen to the occasion as the organization's grown. And we have a core group here, from a leadership perspective, the team leaders, all the crews, and, just watching the team grow, succeed, continue on their journey of getting better and being learning, growth minded, and that growth mindset showing up in how they act every day. It's just amazing to sit back and watch how this thing has become so much bigger than me. And of course, as a founder, you just watch the trajectory and you get to the point that you look back and have this very just evident reminder on a daily basis that it's so much bigger than you. And the trajectory of the organization has taken a life of its own, and honestly has been far more successful than what I ever envisioned. And so, the organization is poised to grow again. And we've had so much more success than what I envisioned when I started. And that's all through just watching the success of everyone on the team and the organization, and the way it's executing. Is just amazing to sit back and look at, and, that aspect of our growth. It just never ceases to amaze me.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I tell you, you should be so proud at what you've built. I mean, just from somebody from the outside, and getting to know you over the last year, and getting to know some of the people on your team. I mean, you should be so proud of what you built. I know you are, but just from an outsider's perspective, just some validation in the type of company that you run and have grown, and honestly, where y'all are going is nothing short of amazing, man. So you've done an awesome job, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining the podcast today. I hope the conversation was as fun for you as it was for me, and learn a little bit more about you, man. And I'd love to have you back on the show. Like, maybe a year from now, you're at 600 people and you crest 1,000 and you're conquering the world, dude. I want you back. But thanks for taking the time today, man.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It was great to be on.
Awesome, brother. Okay, thanks for joining me on Built with Purpose. If you have enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It helps more bold leaders find the show. For resources and show notes, visit our website and connect with me, Chris Fay, on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep building great companies, cultures, and legacies with purpose.